I'm going to read to you from the new keepsake edition of Something to Remember Me By. It's the same story and lovely illustrations as the original edition, but with a new cover and preface. The preface to the new edition reads, "My grandfather, Nicholas Crouchuk, gave his young bride Eva a cedar chest. Over the years, that cedar chest had a proud place in their bedroom at the foot of the bed. It saw other relatives come over from the old country, the birth of 2 children, big holiday gatherings, and the comings, goings, and conversations of everyday family life. It saw hardship and good times. It held the treasures of a lifetime, hopes, dreams, memories, and most importantly, love. And it stood witness to the special relationship between a little girl and her grandmother, my Baba Eva Crouchuk. As I look through some old photos, I find half-forgotten images, most of simple moments that didn't seem special then, but are now. So much to remember her by. If only that cedar chest could talk." Something to remember me by. They were special times, the times that make memories. Every time the little girl visited her grandmother, the house smelled so good. Homemade soup and roast chicken and fresh-baked cookies. The house was happy on sunny days and cozy on rainy days. It was always fun. The little girl could have a snack any time she wanted. She could use the big box of crayons in the kitchen drawer to add drawings to the pad of clean white paper that was just for her. She could chatter about everything and ask questions by the dozen. And if she spilled her juice, oops! Her grandmother would just wipe it up, saying that accidents happen to little people and big people. Then her grandmother would smile a big, warm smile and give the little girl a warm, snuggly hug. The little girl visited her grandmother often. Her grandmother always had time to go for a walk or play a game of cards. Sometimes grandmother and granddaughter would go grocery shopping together. The little girl could choose whatever she wanted her grandmother to cook for dinner. Sometimes grandmother and granddaughter would get ready for a party for friends and relatives. The little girl would figure out exactly the right place to put each shiny spoon and knife and fork. Sometimes grandmother and granddaughter would water the garden at the back of the house, or pick beans or pull carrots. And sometimes grandmother and granddaughter would just sit and watch television together. The grandmother would get an apple and a paring knife from the kitchen. Only big people could use the knife, she would tell her granddaughter. Then the grandmother would carefully peel the apple, letting the strands of red fall to the napkin in her lap. She would cut the apple in half, dig out the core, and slice big wedges of the juicy fruit for the both of them to munch on. "You're the best grandmother in the whole world," the little girl would say. The grandmother would smile a big, warm smile and give her granddaughter a warm, snuggly hug. At the end of one of the visits, the grandmother took her granddaughter's hand and led her into the bedroom. I want to give you something to remember me by," the grandmother started. "Someday that cedar chest at the foot of the bed will be yours, but for now, I want you to have this." She handed her granddaughter a wooden doll. It wore a pale yellow dress with white flowers on it. The painted face had bright red lips and big, wide-open eyes with long eyelashes. After that, many of the visits ended in the same way. Grandmother and granddaughter would go into the bedroom, and the grandmother would say exactly the same thing. "I want to give you something to remember me by. Someday that cedar chest at the foot of the bed will be yours, but for now I want you to have this." And then the grandmother would give her granddaughter this or that. As the girl grew, so did the number of things her grandmother gave her. A stuffed bear with soft white fur, a carved wooden flute, a china figurine of a boy and a small puppy, a shiny copper-colored coin with strange writing on it, a fancy pen that you had to use with special ink, a round gold watch on a thick chain, a silver picture frame, and a flowery orange and red and brown and blue tablecloth. That tablecloth was the one thing the girl thought was, well, really ugly. But she took it and said thank you, as always. Once the girl asked why her grandmother gave her all these things to remember her by. The grandmother smiled a big, warm smile and gave her granddaughter a warm, snuggly hug. "Because everyone wants to be remembered," said the grandmother simply. The girl didn't quite understand. The girl grew up into a young woman. She moved far away. But she and her grandmother would talk on the phone often. This was very exciting for the grandmother. It was a long-distance call, and she didn't get many of those. The grandmother would listen all about the young woman's work and her new family. She was so proud of her granddaughter. At the end of one telephone call, the grandmother told her granddaughter to watch for a package in the mail. The next week, a small box filled with tissue paper arrived. Nestled deep in the tissue was a hand-sewn cushion in the shape of a heart. It was stitched with big purple flowers, tiny pink flowers, and special lettering that said, "I love you." There was a note with the cushion, "Something to remember me by." There came a day when the grandmother made an important long-distance call to her granddaughter. It was time to come and get the cedar chest. The grandmother was moving out of her house. The grandmother couldn't take care of the house anymore. She couldn't see as well as she used to. She couldn't hear as well as she used to. Her hands didn't work as well as they used to. And she was getting forgetful. She couldn't remember some times and places and names. So the young woman came to get the cedar chest and to help her grandmother pack. When all the packing was done, grandmother and granddaughter stood and looked at the empty house. The granddaughter was sad. The house was a very special place for her. The grandmother was sad too, but not about the house. It was time to leave the house. Something else was bothering her. "I'm worried," said the grandmother. "I'm forgetting too many things." "Oh, everyone forgets things," responded her granddaughter reassuringly. "But," said the grandmother softly, "I'm scared that I'm going to forget you." The young woman was silent. She looked at her grandmother. She thought for a moment. The young woman reached over to the important boxes that her grandmother had insisted go with them in the car. She ripped the tape off the top of one box and rummaged through it. Finally, she found the photograph she was looking for, of grandmother and granddaughter. In big, bold letters, the granddaughter wrote both their names on the back of the photograph. "Something to remember me by," said the young woman as she handed the photograph to her grandmother. The grandmother smiled, a big, warm smile, and gave her granddaughter a warm, snuggly hug. Time passed. The grandmother wasn't well and was very, very old. The granddaughter traveled once again to see her. When the young woman walked into her grandmother's room, she expected a big, warm smile and a warm, snuggly hug, like always. But there was only a blank look. The young woman put down the flowers she had brought. "It's me. It's your granddaughter. It's me," she repeated, not believing her grandmother wouldn't remember her. But the grandmother only looked confused. The young woman sat down by the bed. She talked to her grandmother while she was awake. She held her grandmother's hand when she fell asleep. The grandmother's hand was small and wrinkled, but it was soft and warm. The granddaughter stroked the hand and she whispered, "You're the best grandmother in the whole world." The grandmother opened her eyes, and then, for a moment, she smiled that big, warm smile. The grandmother turned her head toward the drawer beside the bed. The young woman opened the drawer. Inside was the old photograph of grandmother and granddaughter. The edges were tattered, and one corner of the photograph was bent. The writing on the back was smudged. The young woman went back to her home, her work, and her family. The cedar chest now sat in her bedroom at the foot of the bed. The chest was filled with all the special things the grandmother had given her granddaughter. The young woman knelt beside the chest and opened it slowly. She loved the familiar smell. She ran her hand over the smooth wood. She looked through the contents. She could almost hear her grandmother's words, "I want to give you something to remember me by." Her grandmother had done just that. As the young woman glanced up from the cedar chest, she noticed her reflection in the dresser mirror. She got up and went to the mirror. She looked closely. She looked for a long time. And then she smiled a big, warm smile. Her grandmother's smile.